If you replay conversations in your head long after they end, if you hear the exact words again, feel the tone, and relive the moment like your mind is replaying a scene, psychology says there's something rare about the way your brain processes social interactions. Not paranoid, not obsessive, not broken, rare. Because most people don't replay conversations at all. They forget what was said within hours, sometimes within minutes. They remember the summary. You remember the details. You remember the exact phrasing someone used. You replay the tone they spoke in. You notice the pause before they answered. The way their smile didn't quite match their words. The subtle shift in energy that didn't feel accidental. And at some point in your life, you were probably told that this means you're overthinking. That you should let it go. That you're reading too much into things. That you need to move on and stop analyzing every little word. But psychology tells a very different story. Replaying conversations isn't random. It isn't a flaw. It's structured. It follows patterns. It's tied to how your brain processes social information, emotional cues, and uncertainty. And in many cases, it's linked to a specific combination of cognitive and emotional traits that only a small percentage of people consistently show. If you replay conversations not just once, but over and over, dissecting what was said, what wasn't said, what was implied, and what might happen next, you likely have at least some of these 6 rare traits. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why your mind works this way, why it developed this habit, and why it's not something you need to fix. Stay with me, because later I'll show you a simple way to interrupt the replay when it turns into self-punishment, without forcing yourself to stop thinking or pretending it doesn't matter. Before we begin, if you're drawn to calm, grounded, and genuinely practical psychology-based guidance, please subscribe to Emotional Growth. If this video helps you feel seen, understood, or less alone, you're exactly where you're meant to be. Now let's start with the first trait, because once you recognize this one, everything else will begin to make sense. Let me ask you something. When you replay a conversation, what are you actually searching for? Are you trying to understand what they meant? Are you wondering if you said something wrong? Are you sensing that something felt off, but you couldn't name it in the moment? Or are you trying to predict what this interaction means for the relationship going forward? Here's what matters. Your brain isn't replaying conversations because it enjoys stress. It's replaying them because it believes there's important information inside the interaction. Information that could affect your sense of safety, your belonging, your emotional security, your standing with someone who matters to you. Humans are wired for connection. And the part of the brain responsible for emotional survival, the limbic system, doesn't treat social uncertainty as neutral. Ambiguity raises cortisol. Mixed signals activate alertness. Unfinished emotional information keeps the nervous system awake. So when a conversation doesn't feel fully resolved, your brain keeps working on it. Now imagine 2 people leaving the same interaction. One forgets it by dinner. The other replays it days later. Which one is wrong? Or is one simply operating with a higher resolution internal system? One that captures more data, more nuance, more emotional detail? That question leads us directly into the first rare trait. Because if you replay conversations, your brain is doing something most people's brains simply don't, and it changes the way you perceive every social interaction. If you replay conversations, the first rare trait you likely have is this. You operate with a level of social awareness that most people never develop. This isn't just being observant. It's not simply paying attention. It's the ability to register multiple layers of social information at the same time, often without consciously trying to. While most people hear the words being spoken and take them at face value, your brain is simultaneously processing tone, micro-expressions, hesitations, changes in pacing, word choice, and the emotional current underneath the conversation. Your mind is running parallel streams of analysis in real time. And here's something important to understand. This process isn't voluntary. You're not deciding to analyze this deeply. Your brain does it automatically because that's how it learned to keep you oriented in social environments. So when the conversation ends, the processing doesn't automatically shut off. If your brain hasn't reached a clear conclusion, if something felt slightly off, ambiguous, or emotionally incomplete, it keeps working. That's why the replay happens. Not because you're obsessive, not because you're anxious by nature, but because your brain hasn't finished assembling the full picture yet. Psychology often refers to this as high social monitoring. People with this trait don't just hear what's said. They notice how it's said. And just as importantly, they notice what isn't said. Let me ask you something, and answer this honestly. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling fine, only to suddenly realize hours later that something didn't quite add up? Have you ever replayed a moment and thought, wait, that agreement didn't feel solid? Or, they said yes, but their tone didn't match? Have you ever sensed tension in a room that no one else seemed aware of, and then felt confused when others acted like everything was normal? That's not imagination. That's perception. Your brain is detecting subtle social data that most people simply don't register. And for many people, this level of awareness didn't develop randomly. It often forms in environments where reading people accurately mattered, where emotional signals weren't always direct, where moods could shift without warning, where understanding someone's emotional state before speaking could prevent conflict, withdrawal, or rejection. In those environments, the brain adapts. Through neuroplasticity, it strengthens the neural pathways responsible for detecting nuance. It learns to read between the lines, to track inconsistencies between words and behavior, to notice emotional shifts before they're openly expressed. Over time, this becomes automatic. Even now, in conversations that are objectively safe, your brain still operates at this heightened resolution. That's why you might replay a short exchange with a coworker and suddenly understand the meaning behind a brief pause, or why a casual comment keeps echoing in your mind, not because it was dramatic, but because it didn't align with the emotional tone you sensed underneath it. Studies suggest that only a minority of people consistently process social interactions at this depth. And yes, this can feel exhausting. You see things others don't. You feel shifts others gloss over. You notice changes in energy that no one else even registers. Sometimes you wish you could turn it off. Sometimes you envy people who can just walk away and forget. But here's the truth most people never hear. This level of perception is also a strength. It allows you to navigate complex social situations with precision, to sense emotional distance before it turns into disconnection, to recognize manipulation or dishonesty early before it causes damage, to offer support to someone before they even know how to ask for it. Your brain replays conversations because it's exceptionally skilled at reading people. That's not a flaw. It's a rare form of awareness. And once you truly understand that, the second trait becomes much easier to recognize. Because for you, it was never just about what you noticed. It was also about what you felt. If you replay conversations, the second rare trait you likely have is this. You don't just think about what was said. You feel it. Long after the conversation ends, the emotional residue of it is still present in your body. For most people, emotions are momentary. They rise, peak, and fade relatively quickly. For you, emotions move differently. Your emotional system processes information more deeply and for longer periods of time. When someone says something that stings, even subtly, your brain doesn't simply register it and move on. It revisits the moment. It examines the emotional tone. It tries to understand why it had an impact. This is what psychology refers to as deep emotional processing. And it's not just happening in your thoughts. It's happening in your nervous system. When a conversation carries tension, rejection, or uncertainty, your body may release cortisol, the stress hormone. Your muscles tighten. Your breath changes. Your system stays alert. When a conversation carries warmth, validation, or genuine connection, chemicals like dopamine and oxytocin are released, creating a sense of bonding, safety, and emotional ease. But when signals are mixed, when someone's words sound polite but their tone feels distant, or when their behavior doesn't match what they said, your nervous system doesn't get closure. And without closure, it keeps returning to the moment. That replay isn't a weakness. It's your system trying to complete an emotional cycle that never fully resolved. Let me ask you something, and see if this lands. Have you ever been confused about why a single comment stayed with you for days, even though logically you told yourself it wasn't a big deal? Have you ever felt emotionally unsettled after a conversation, even though you couldn't point to anything objectively wrong? Have you ever replayed a conversation not because you wanted to, but because your body still felt activated by it? That's deep emotional processing. People with this trait don't skim emotional experiences. They absorb them. Your brain doesn't just store the words that were spoken. It stores the emotional context surrounding them. You sense when someone is holding back. You feel disappointment beneath polite language. You notice when enthusiasm sounds forced or connection feels thin. And because your emotional system runs deep, you can't simply move on until your brain understands what the experience meant. Not just intellectually, but emotionally. This can be exhausting. You might wonder why others seem unaffected, while you're still reflecting. Why something small feels big to you. Why you're still thinking about a conversation from weeks ago, when everyone else has clearly moved on. But here's the part that's rarely acknowledged. This depth is also what gives you profound empathy. It allows for emotional intelligence. It allows for genuine attunement to others. It allows you to connect in ways that feel real, not surface level. You don't just understand what people say. You understand what they feel, even when they don't say it out loud. And that ability is rare. Yes, it comes with challenges. Yes, it can feel overwhelming at times. But it also means you're capable of insight, compassion, and relational awareness that many people never develop. Your depth isn't a flaw. It's a capacity. And beneath that capacity, something else is happening. Because when you replay conversations, your brain isn't only processing emotion, it's also searching for patterns. And that brings us directly to the third trait. If you replay conversations, the third rare trait you likely have is this. Your brain is wired for pattern recognition and predictive thinking. When you replay an interaction, you're not simply revisiting the past. You're scanning for clues about what might happen next. Your mind begins asking quiet, automatic questions, often without you even realizing it. What did that tone mean? Were they being fully honest with me? Did something shift in the dynamic? Did I miss a signal? What should I expect the next time we interact? These questions aren't random. They're part of how your prefrontal cortex works, the part of the brain responsible for planning, prediction, and meaning-making. When your brain senses uncertainty, it tries to reduce it. And ambiguity is one of the most uncomfortable states for a predictive brain. Clear conflict is easier to process than mixed signals. Direct disagreement is easier than polite uncertainty. A clear no is often less distressing than a vague maybe. So when a conversation feels emotionally unclear, your brain keeps returning to it. It compares the interaction to past experiences. It looks for familiar patterns. It flags anything that doesn't quite fit. This is known as predictive social modeling. Your brain is essentially running simulations, trying to understand the trajectory of the relationship before anything becomes explicit. And for many people, this ability didn't develop by accident. It often forms in environments where anticipating others' reactions mattered, where emotions could change quickly, where tension could appear without warning, where reading the room helped you stay connected or avoid conflict. In those conditions, the brain adapts. Through neuroplasticity, it strengthens neural pathways that support anticipation and pattern detection. It learns to spot subtle changes early, to notice shifts before they're spoken, to prepare before things escalate. Over time, this becomes automatic. Even now, your mind may run these simulations without your conscious permission. That's why you might replay a brief exchange and suddenly feel uneasy. Not because anything obvious went wrong, but because something didn't match the internal pattern your brain expects. Have you ever sensed a shift in someone's behavior before they acknowledged anything had changed? Have you ever been told, "You're reading too much into it," only to later realize you were right? That's not coincidence. Your brain has been quietly collecting data others overlook. And while this constant analysis can be mentally tiring, it also makes you perceptive, prepared, and rarely blindsided. You tend to see relational changes coming. You notice distance before it turns into disconnection. You sense instability before it becomes obvious. You're not overthinking. You're thinking ahead, and that's a powerful cognitive skill. But here's where it becomes more personal. Because if you replay conversations, your analysis doesn't stop with other people. It eventually turns inward, which brings us directly to the fourth trait. If you replay conversations, the fourth rare trait you likely have is this. You possess a high level of self-awareness and internal reflection. You don't only analyze what others said. You analyze yourself. You replay how you responded, how your voice sounded, the timing of your words, whether you expressed yourself clearly or held something back, whether you came across as confident, awkward, distant, or too open. This is known as metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thoughts, reactions, and behavior from the inside. And this ability is far less common than most people realize. Many people move through conversations on autopilot. They react emotionally, say what comes out in the moment, and move on, often repeating the same relational patterns without noticing. You don't. You reflect. Your mind naturally turns inward after interactions, reviewing not just what happened, but how you showed up within it. You ask yourself questions like, did I say too much? Did I say too little? Did I express what I actually meant? Did I minimize myself to keep the peace? Did I miss an opportunity to set a boundary? Should I have handled that differently? This level of self-examination can feel heavy. At times, it can feel exhausting, like your mind never fully rests after social interactions. And sometimes, it can start to feel like self-criticism. But at its core, this trait comes from something deeper and more meaningful. You care about how you show up. You care about clarity. You care about integrity. You care about being understood, and about understanding others accurately. Psychology consistently links this kind of self-awareness to emotional intelligence, empathy, and long-term personal growth. People who reflect in this way are more capable of learning from experience. They're more likely to adjust their behavior intentionally. They're more likely to break unhealthy patterns instead of repeating them unconsciously. They're more likely to develop emotional maturity over time. But there's an important distinction to make here. Reflection supports growth. Self-judgment creates suffering. And if you replay conversations often, you may cross that line without realizing it. Instead of asking, what can I learn from this? You may find yourself asking, what's wrong with me? Instead of integrating the experience, your mind starts scanning for mistakes. Instead of curiosity, the inner dialogue becomes harsh and critical. This shift often happens when a reflective mind meets a nervous system that doesn't feel fully safe. When cortisol is elevated, reflection loses its softness. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for insight and learning, gets overridden by the stress response, and self-awareness turns into self-attack. So let me ask you something important. When you replay conversations, do you feel wiser afterward? Or smaller? Do you come away with clarity and understanding? Or with tightness in your chest and tension in your body? Because that distinction matters. Your capacity for reflection is not the problem. It's a strength. It allows you to grow, refine, and evolve in ways many people never attempt. But it needs to be paired with self-compassion, with a nervous system that feels safe enough to reflect without fear. You're not replaying conversations because you're defective. You're replaying them because you hold yourself to a high internal standard, and because you genuinely care about your impact on others. And beneath all of this, there's an even deeper layer. Because for many people, conversation replay isn't just cognitive. It's physiological. And the fifth trait explains why. If you replay conversations, the fifth rare trait you likely have is this. Your nervous system is highly vigilant. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means your body learned to stay alert. Psychology refers to this as hypervigilance, a state in which the nervous system continuously scans for potential threat, even in situations that are objectively safe. And for many people who replay conversations, this vigilance didn't develop randomly. It developed as a survival response. If you grew up in an environment where emotional signals were inconsistent, where approval could suddenly turn into criticism, where affection felt conditional, or where you had to carefully monitor others' moods to stay emotionally safe, your nervous system adapted. It learned that paying close attention could prevent harm, that anticipation could reduce risk, that staying alert meant staying connected or protected. Over time, this adaptation became automatic. Your limbic system, the part of the brain responsible for emotional survival, became highly sensitive to shifts in tone, expression, and emotional availability. So now, when a conversation feels even slightly off, your body reacts before your mind does. Your chest tightens, your stomach drops, your breathing becomes shallow or irregular, and almost immediately, your brain begins replaying the interaction. Not because you're weak, Not because you're overly anxious by nature, but because your nervous system is trying to answer one fundamental question. Am I safe here? This is why replaying often focuses on what might have gone wrong. Why your mind scans for signs of rejection. Why you wonder how you were perceived. Why uncertainty feels so uncomfortable, sometimes unbearable. This pattern isn't a personality flaw. It's a psychobiological response. When cortisol is elevated, the mind stays alert. The nervous system searches for certainty, and the brain replays conversations in an attempt to reduce perceived threat. In other words, replaying is your system trying to regain a sense of safety. And here's something important to understand. This response once protected you. It helped you navigate environments where emotional safety wasn't guaranteed. It helped you stay attuned, adaptable, and responsive. But patterns that help us survive early in life can become burdens later on, because the nervous system doesn't automatically update itself. It doesn't know on its own that you're safer now. It needs new experiences and conscious reassurance to learn that it no longer has to stay on high alert. So let me ask you something, and notice what comes up. Do you replay conversations more when you're already tired or emotionally drained? More after interactions where you didn't feel fully seen or understood? More with people whose approval matters deeply to you? That's not coincidence. That's your nervous system responding to perceived vulnerability. And here's the most important reframe of all. You're not replaying conversations because you're broken. You're replaying them because, at some point, your system learned that vigilance equaled safety, that adaptation helped you survive, and now, with awareness, it can begin to soften. Because understanding this brings us to the final trait, the one that explains why certain conversations remain so vivid in your mind, long after others have faded. If you replay conversations, the sixth rare trait you likely have is this. You have an unusually strong memory for spoken language. You don't just remember the general idea of what was said. You remember the words themselves, the exact phrasing, the emphasis on certain sentences, the pauses between thoughts, sometimes even the precise order of the conversation, weeks or months later. This ability is known as high verbal working memory. Most people retain only the emotional gist of an interaction and quickly lose the details. Their brains compress the experience into a vague summary and move on. Yours doesn't. Your brain stores language with precision. And because language carries emotional meaning, you don't just remember what was said. You remember how it felt to hear it. This can be both a gift and a burden. On one hand, it gives you a deep understanding of people. You notice inconsistencies in how someone speaks over time. You remember promises that others forget they made. You detect subtle shifts in tone, wording, or emotional availability long before they become obvious. You often understand what's changing in a relationship before anyone names it. On the other hand, this precision means certain words echo longer than you'd like. A careless sentence can replay repeatedly. A dismissive tone can linger in your body. A moment of emotional distance can feel frozen in time. Not because you're dwelling on it, but because your brain hasn't finished processing the meaning behind it. If this resonates, let me ask you something. Have you ever wished you could forget a specific sentence someone said to you? Have you ever thought, why does my brain hold on to this so clearly when everyone else seems to forget? Have you ever replayed a conversation simply because the words felt unfinished? Like something important was said, but not fully explained? Your memory isn't malfunctioning. It's highly tuned. Research shows that people with strong verbal memory often excel in communication, writing, teaching, mediation, and relational insight. Your brain is wired to extract meaning through language. So when a conversation feels unresolved, your mind keeps returning to it, not to hurt you, but to understand it, to place it correctly, to integrate it, to make sense of what it revealed. If you replay conversations, you're not obsessive. You're precise. And when strong verbal memory is combined with deep emotional processing, heightened social awareness, and a vigilant nervous system, it makes sense that conversations leave a lasting imprint on you. Your system captures more data than most. But here's the key question, and it's an important one. What do you do with that imprint? Do you use it to gain insight? Or do you turn it into self-punishment? Because the goal isn't to erase your depth. It's to learn how to work with it, without turning it against yourself. And that brings us to the final integration. Because once you understand why your mind works this way, you can begin to relate to it differently. And that changes everything. If you replay conversations, it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means your mind works in a way that is both sensitive and precise. You notice deeply. You feel deeply. You reflect deeply. And those qualities didn't appear by accident. They developed because, at some point in your life, they helped you adapt. They helped you understand people. They helped you protect yourself. They helped you stay connected in environments where clarity wasn't always available. Your brain learned patterns. Your nervous system learned vigilance. Your memory learned to hold on to language. And now, even when you don't need these traits the way you once did, they're still part of how you experience the world. The goal isn't to stop replaying conversations completely. The goal is to understand why your mind does it, and to decide when the replay is helping and when it's hurting. So here's a simple reset you can use the next time you notice the loop starting. Pause for a moment and ask yourself, am I replaying this to gain clarity, or because my body doesn't feel safe yet? If the answer is clarity, you can choose a grounded action. Maybe it's writing down one insight and letting it rest. Maybe it's planning a calm, direct conversation. Maybe it's simply recognizing what you learned. If the answer is safety, your nervous system needs reassurance, not analysis. That might mean slowing your breath, placing a hand on your chest, reminding yourself that you are not in danger right now. When the body settles, the mind follows. This is how new neural pathways are formed, not by forcing yourself to stop thinking, but by teaching your system that it doesn't need to stay on high alert. You don't need to become colder. You don't need to become numb. You don't need to stop caring. You just need to stop turning your depth inward as self-punishment. So the next time you catch yourself replaying a conversation, try this instead. Acknowledge the intelligence behind the behavior. Thank your mind for trying to protect you. Then decide whether the replay deserves more energy, or whether it's time to let the moment pass. You are not overthinking. You are processing deeply, and depth, when paired with compassion, becomes wisdom. Before you go, if this video resonated with you, if it helped you understand yourself a little better, please subscribe to Emotional Growth. And if this video opened something in you, if you're realizing that your nervous system may have been in survival mode longer than you thought, and you want to go deeper into your emotional development, I've created a practical guide to emotional self-mastery to support you. This guide was designed to help you regulate your emotions, stop overreacting or oversharing, and build inner stability step by step at your own pace, without pressure and without becoming emotionally closed off. You'll find the guide in the first pinned comment below. Thank you for listening.